Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for joining me today, and I appreciate your time this morning to spend a little bit of time introducing Gracious Space and talk about the training that I went through over the past month or so and how it can be applied to our extension work in these two counties. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I am going to define what Gracious Space is, give you a little bit about the history of Gracious Space, and then spend the majority of the time focusing on the 4 elements of Gracious Space. This is the meat of the program, and I'll kind of talk through them in a bit of detail. Then we'll do a short reflection on kind of where you're at, what you're thinking about these 4 elements, and then provide a quick summary. So before I go on to the next slide, I'm going to ask you to trust me just for a minute or so, and I want everyone to close their eyes. As you close your eyes, just take a couple deep breaths. It's not going to be for long, I promise. I want you to think about Gracious Space and what that phrase means to you. When you open your eyes, not yet, you're going to see images on the next slide. And I want you to look at the images and identify with one of them in terms of what the term Gracious Space means to you. So everyone open your eyes. Thank you for trusting me. And now you can see 8 different images on this slide. So before I define it, I just want you to look at these photos and tell me which one resonates with you most in terms of what Gracious Space means to you. So I'll give you a couple more seconds to look through them. There's no wrong answer. And then I'll just start by sharing one of mine. So the one on the bottom row, second from the right, is a picture in a home with some chairs around a table, a fireplace. Maybe I envision folks there having a beverage, maybe a cocktail or a cup of tea, depending on the meeting and the people you're gathered with. But that's one that kind of speaks Gracious Space to me. So does anyone want to share which photo you selected and why? Great, thank you for sharing. So we're going to move on and give you a more formal definition. So Gracious Space is a leadership tool, and it's developed by the Center for Ethical Leadership. It's also a framework for inclusive collaboration. So a foundation that you can build, something very intentional to make sure that you have lots of different people represented who are collaborating in a meaningful way to come to decision-making or move through a process on a particular project. So Gracious Space is a spirit, it's a setting where we invite the stranger and learn in public. And we'll talk about that bullet point and those details a little bit more. But to take a step back, and when I think about Gracious Space and what I've gotten out of this training over the last month or so, is on the right-hand side, you can see internal and external. So I think about Gracious Space as a mindset for myself and how I walk into a meeting and what I can take with me, whether it's a one-on-one interaction or walking into a big public meeting like we had last week with the Joint Commission meeting. And I also think about it externally. So Gracious Space is this tool that we can use to be very intentional about a couple different elements of a meeting that you're having. So a little bit about the history of this program. So in 1996, the director of the Servant Leadership Association, Jim Enrich, he was preparing for a big talk at a conference. He knew there was some tension there with participants. And as he prepared for it, he shared with his colleague, Bill Grace, who's the founder of the Center for Ethical Leadership. He said he envisioned this environment going into it where the stranger would feel welcome, a gracious space. And that's where that term was kind of born. And so it evolved from there between Jim, who shared it with Bill, who then shared it with Pat Hughes. And this term Gracious Space evolved, and Pat took it and created the foundation for the 7 steps of the common good. And so in the bottom left, you can see this book title, Gracious Space. And so it was published in 2004 by Pat along with Bill. And that was really the foundation for the training, the Train the Trainer that I went through over the past month, this book. And a second book came out in 2011 called Courageous Collaboration with Gracious Space. And it's really evolved into a series of trainers who can talk about Gracious Space and teach it as I am today. And there are many within the MSU framework across the state, as well as outside of MSU too. So we have a lot of resources across the state that are becoming more familiar with this tool and this mindset. So here are the 4 elements: Gracious Space, is these 4 things combined, or these are 4 elements you can take. We'll go into each one more detail, but in a nutshell, we start with spirit. So this is intentionally creating a supportive environment and how you show up to a space. Then we move on to setting. So paying attention to that physical environment and everything within that meeting space, from light to food, etc. And then we focus on inviting the stranger. So intentionally seeking the other, and the other is going to look very different depending on the topic, depending on the meeting. And we'll talk about different ways that we can include more people with more diverse voices at the table. And then we finish with learning in public. So this is about, again, internally and letting go and opening up to the possibilities of different solutions, different strategies, different ways to tackle a problem, and being open to doing that in a public setting while you're meeting with others. So those are the 4 elements, and we're going to go back and really focus on the first one to start, spirit. So that bottom right picture is just an example. How you show up matters, and some of our thinking faces look a little stronger than others, right? We might be carrying some baggage with us as we come into that meeting, but how you show up matters. What distractions do you have? Being very present in that, and kind of setting other things that we're worried about from the past and we're thinking about, and deadlines after this meeting, kind of setting that aside and being totally present and engaged with that particular conversation or meeting. One example is, how have you prepared for the meeting? Have you been thinking about it for a couple weeks, read through the agenda, know who's going to be there? Or did you get a meeting invite, show up, and you're kind of reacting on the spot? What current distractions do you have? I already talked a little bit about this, but in that top right photo of phones, we have our world at our fingertips. And so if you are in a situation where you have an emergency and you're expecting a really important phone call, maybe making the others in the meeting, maybe alert them and let them know that ahead of time. Or you're picking up your phone because you're bored and you're distracted, or you're trying to multitask and respond to emails because you think you'll be more productive. And to end with a quote for spirit, our intention creates our reality. So you may be familiar with perception becomes reality, but walk it a step back and think about the intention we have that we're creating going into that conversation, and then that will affect perception. That will affect reality when people get out of that. So it's a little bit about spirit. Moving on to setting. So this is the physical environment of the space we're meeting in. That top right picture is a little bit dramatic, but how many of you have walked into a meeting and it feels like that? You're in a dark, dingy, cold basement with no light and a very small exit door. So being intentional about a comfortable space is really important and helpful to the process. We want to think about other elements of comfort for that meeting space. So light, temperature, the spacing between people, how people can see each other. Are we looking at the back of heads, or are we looking at each other's faces and body language and can get a lot more out of that interaction? Access in and out of the room. Food considerations. This is the biggest picture on this slide for a reason. Whether you can incorporate some refreshments to keep people engaged, a little bit of sugar, or just to get them to be awake in the middle of the afternoon, or you have an opportunity to provide a full meal. So for example, with our Rancher Roundtable program, we were able last year to provide a full dinner, and that changes the dynamic of that setting, creates a social element. People are sharing a meal together. They're exchanging information and catching up before the actual meeting starts. And then last of all, respecting everyone's time. So setting the agenda, setting a time expectation and sticking to that. Even, in the case where you guys are in public meetings and have lots of different line items to review within a period of time, sticking to that agenda and that time frame for each of those items, because folks are kind of coming and going, and you want to respect everyone's time, including your own. So that's setting. So moving on to inviting the stranger. So all of you are familiar with unexpected strangers in public meetings. They might come into your head a little bit like that top right photo, where people are very passionate and want to be seen and heard about a particular topic. But I encourage you to think about this in a little bit of a different way before that meeting even starts, and being proactive instead of reactive to the strangers that show up. Invite them, seek them out, their input, their participation ahead of time, and make them feel included and part of the process well before that meeting takes place and it's showtime. And think about, as they're sharing their passion in the meeting, what can I learn from them? Who are they? Who do they represent? What are they saying, and why? What's their why for how passionate they are and how they feel about certain things? And some other examples I thought of regarding our office and the extension services for some of these newer strangers and people that we're serving, small acreage landowners. There are more of them. They're coming in from other counties, from other states, and they're going to be looking for extension services in a different way and different information. Disgruntled 4-H volunteers. This isn't a new stranger, but it kind of takes a roller coaster of experience where they're going to pop up at different times, different folks, different concerns that they have. And so always kind of being ready for how they might show up and how to engage them in a way that makes them feel valued, and we can learn from them and make decisions together. Small business owners and partner agencies. These, because we have an expanded capacity more recently with our office, we're not only forming relationships with these stakeholders, but we are creating programs together. And they're such a valuable stakeholder to engage and get feedback from them and be part of our evaluation process to ask them, how do they see themselves as partners? What benefit are they getting from the extension office when maybe we hadn't had as much time and capacity to interact with them in the past? So the fourth element is learning in public. So again, back to you and you being in this meeting and being open to different possibilities. So you may come into a meeting with a particular decision and say, it's either going to be yes or no. It's either going to be, we're going to get it done in 5 years, or it's not going to happen at all. And maybe approaching it with someone else coming into that meeting may have a different outcome, and it might be possible, and it might be best for all the stakeholders. So listening more, judging less, listening to learn, right? And you can do that through asking questions, and asking questions of those around you, not just to learn more content and get more from them, but again, getting to that why. Why do they feel the way they do? Why are they contributing in this way? Why do they think that this possibility is the best thing? And that'll tell you a lot about their what. And then sharing with others. So we can only do with what people provide us in terms of information. So if we're keeping our cards pretty close to our chest, we're not giving a lot of folks more information to kind of see where you're at and to make progress as a group with making decisions. So the more you're comfortable sharing with others where you are, even if it's uncertainty, that sets an example for the others in the room to also play their cards and show you what they have going on, as well as it gives them really vital information so you can make more progress as a group. So a quick reflection, I just kind of ran through those 4 elements. And I want you to take the note cards in front of you, and I want you to think about these 4 elements we just went through: spirit, setting, inviting the stranger, and learning in public. And I want you to answer 2 questions very, very briefly here. Name one of these elements that you feel the most competent in, and then which one do you feel least competent? You don't have to put your name on it. I just want to see where we're at with familiarity and competency as we've just kind of presented these 4. So go ahead and jot that down. I'll give you a minute and I'll start walking around to collect them. And then I'm going to pass them out to random people, and we're just going to share what's on the card that we have. And this will help us to see what we feel least competent in, and then that can help shape our next meeting, and we can spend more time in one or more of these areas. Great, thanks for taking the time to do that. So that wraps it up. In the last 10 or 12 minutes, we've spent a little bit of time talking about what Gracious Space is, the history of this program, and those 4 key elements. And so I really thank you for the opportunity to introduce this tool. And I look forward to having additional conversations in the future about it and how we can incorporate more of it into our work together. Thank you.